I would like to go over pseudo-class selectors and explain how they are used in context of the assignment. First, I would like to go over the source code. We have an HTML5 layout, meaning we are using semantic elements. However, I do have some div elements in this document also. Div is just a generic container with no special meaning. The HTML5 elements have a meaning that is more related to the type of information contained inside that element. For example, nav would indicate this is a navigation section. We have a header indicating it's the top of the page. We have an aside meaning it's some additional type of content. We have several section elements which just serve to divide up the page in meaningful units. Notice I have a lot of ID attributes already set here. Here we have section, ID equals college. Here we have section, ID equals WebD. In both of these sections, we have div elements, H2 elements, and P elements. And if we wanted to style an H2P or div differently in one section or another, that ID would be very useful. We can use that at the beginning of a descendant selector so that only the elements that are descendants of that ID will be affected. I want to deviate for the assignment for a minute and point out something here. Now we are looking at a template that was created using a Bootstrap framework. I am now looking at the HTML code here. This is what is called a div layout. This layout is predominantly developed using div elements. It is also predominantly developed using class selectors. The reason for this is that if you have a template, the author of the template does not know how you're going to be using it with respect to meaning. Therefore, they give you the generic divs as opposed to a semantic element. That doesn't mean you can't change them. Also, because they don't know if you're going to be changing the structure, they will never use pseudo classes. They will always just use regular classes. If you go to work in the web development field, you're going to be probably working with div layouts. WordPress uses them, Dreamweaver uses them. Most of the websites are developed with these div layout templates. So I want you to be aware of this, and you'll probably be using classes. I want you to understand pseudo classes. They can come in very handy, but you may not really be using them much in the real world. So let's take a look at one of the requirements from the assignment. We want to add a bottom border to the last div in section ID equals college. So let's take a look at the HTML. Here is section ID equals college. And there are actually 6 div elements inside it. So we want to apply a style to the last div in this section. I could very easily just put a class here in this last div. However, that defeats the purpose of the assignment. How do we access that last div? We first start with the ID and create a descendant selector using a pseudo class. So here we start with our ID, #college, and then we access the div element. But we don't want all of the div elements, we only want the last one. So this is where the last of type pseudo class comes in, and it is attached to that div using a colon. There is no space to the right or to the left of that colon, or it won't work. We also could have used the last child pseudo class because the div elements are all children or direct descendants of the section element. In this case, the last child and the last of type are one and the same, and they refer to the element that they're attached to is the div. So it's saying, apply this style to the div that is a last child in the section ID equals college. And now when I go back into my browser, I can see indeed that I have that bottom border there. Let's look at another example. This is on the handout number 2. Using a pseudo class selector, we want to apply a background color to every other div inside section ID equals college. So if we go back and look at our section ID equals college, we see that there are 6 divs. Rather than putting a class inside every other div, we can use a pseudo class. So looking at our CSS, we start with our ID selector #college. We want to apply the styles to the divs. This time we're using the nth of type selector. The nth of type refers to which sequence you want. It could be the first, the second, the third, the fourth. However, if we pass it the word even, it's going to work with the second, fourth, sixth, etc. If we passed it the word odd, it would be first, third, fifth, etc. So this will apply the background color, and it makes it kind of easy to do here. You will commonly see this specific pseudo class used when you want to stripe a HTML table. Every other row is typically a different color. And now we go back into our web page here, and we can see that that color is being applied. I would like to point out that we could have also used the nth child, passing it the value of either even or odd. In many instances, the nth child, nth of type are one and the same. The same with the last child, last of type, first child, first of type. In many instances, they're one and the same, not all the time though. Let's look at one more. This is number 7 from the handout, and we're going to apply a pseudo class selector to make the last paragraph in the WEBD section italic. So here we have our section ID equals WEBD. Now notice we have an H2 and a P at the top of this section. Underneath that we have 3 divs. Each div contains a H2 followed by 2 different paragraphs. We only want to affect that second paragraph inside that div, and there are 3 of them. So we need to find the correct combination of pseudo classes to isolate the last P of that div, which is inside section ID equals WEBD. So we'll start with our ID, WEBD, and next we want to access the div, so that's the element selector there. We want to access the P that is a descendant of that div. However, we don't want both P's, we only want the last P. So here it's last of type. It also could have been P last child. I think I like using the type better than the very first paragraph was not affected, nor the first paragraphs inside the div. So this is just an overview of the theory behind pseudo classes. They can be mentally challenging, but they can come in very handy at times.